Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there and welcome to the WP Builds podcast once again. This is episode number 205, entitled Flipping Websites with Blake Hutchison. It was published on Thursday the 12th of November 2020. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and some very short housekeeping before we begin. As we all know, Black Friday is just around the corner and WP Builds has got all of your WordPress Black Friday deals sorted. Head over to wpbuilds.com/black. That's wpbuilds.com/black. And we've got a searchable, filterable list of loads of things to do with WordPress. So if you're in the market for something this Black Friday, you can go to that page, click the yellow button, and you'll be able to search and filter. You can search by product name, product type, and also by the discount amount. It's really useful. Go and check it out. If you've got a product that you'd like us to list, please click the blue Add Your Deal button on that page. You'll need to be on a desktop to do that. Once more, wpbuilds.com/black. If you would like to keep in touch with everything that we do, head over to wpbuilds.com/subscribe, and there you will find all of the things that we produce each and every week. Perhaps the best thing to do is join our Facebook group of over 2,700 very friendly and polite WordPressers. It's a great place to hang out. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by A/B Split Test. Do you want to set up your A/B split tests in record time, like in a couple of minutes? Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part is it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder and the WordPress block editor. Go check it out and get a free demo at absplittest.com. Okay, what are we talking about in the podcast today? This is a really interesting subject. It's an area that I haven't really strayed into. It's all about flipping things. And what I mean by that is something that you've got that you want to sell, or something that you'd like to have and you wish to buy it. There's loads of different opportunities here. For example, it could be as simple as buying a domain, but it could be buying an app, or it could be buying some sort of SaaS thing which is out there. Blake Hutchison has a product called Flippa, flippa.com, and that service takes care of the entire process, and there's more to it than you might think. So check out this episode of the WP Builds podcast. I hope that you enjoy it. Hello there, welcome to the WP Builds podcast. I'm glad that you've made it to the interview part. Today I'm joined all the way from Australia by Blake Hutchison. Hello, Blake.
Hi Nathan, how are you?
I'm very good. It's an interesting time that we're going through. As we're recording this, the location where Blake lives is undergoing lockdowns and things, so we were just saying he's been sat in the same chair for many months, probably getting a bit fed up. Is life normal over there? How's it going?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say it's normal. I think we're doing better than some, but we've got a particular problem in Victoria, which is the state that Melbourne is based in, Melbourne, Australia, and we're on 6-week lockdown, so you're allowed out for an hour's worth of exercise and only to get food unless you are considered an essential worker. So it's pretty restrictive. I'm sitting on a dining table in a little house, and I go out for my coffee and then in the morning and then my walk in the afternoon, and that is it.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Well, I don't mean this to sound flippant, he said, sort of coining a phrase, which we'll get to shortly. But best of luck. I hope that all of that works out for you. But Blake is certainly not here to talk about that. He's here to talk about something which we've really genuinely never strayed into. And it's an area that I feel some of you may be deeply interested in. Perhaps it's something you've engaged in. But Blake is here. I'm going to say the word represent, but that might be the wrong word. It may be that he founded or owns or what have you. We'll get him to talk about that. But we're talking about Flippa, Flippa. So you can find that at flippa.com, 2 P's and an A at the end. And this is a service, well, I could describe it, but you know what? I think you'd do a better job. So what is Flippa?
Oh, thank you, Nathan. Yeah, it's a marketplace to buy and sell what we define as digital real estate. So for your listeners, WordPress sites are the most commonly sold piece of digital real estate on Flippa. And that's pretty cool because you get to see awesome sort of passion projects that are listed, and people sell those to go on and do whatever they want to do, but to get a good price for. And the marketplace has lots of demand. So it seems to be a burgeoning area.
Yeah. So let's just take it from the point of view of the seller, first of all. So I presume that this is where the journey begins. Is there any sort of criteria? Does the domain have to be a particular age? Does it have to have a certain volume of traffic? Do you go through some sort of onboarding process to give the domain evaluation? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about selling on your digital real estate, as you say. I'm just going to say website to somebody else for an agreed fee. Everybody's happy. I presume that there's a proportion of that fee that goes your way as the marketplace. But is there any sort of gotchas on the way? Are there any domains that you just flat turn down because they stray into topics that you don't want to touch, that are a bit toxic, or perhaps they just don't have the traction? Anything that you require before onboarding then?
Yeah, great question. I mean, generally not. There's a couple of taboo areas, but generally speaking, those taboo areas relate to legality versus anything else. So if it's legal subject matter, then you can list it on Flippa. But where we do have some, I guess, criteria and hurdles, if you like, relate to price. So you can't just list a 3-month-old WordPress site for $1 million, because that would be a little bit silly and wouldn't be representative of the true value of that website. So price is the biggest hurdle, and we help people along in that regard. But really what it's about is helping people who have run a passion project, or helping people who build WordPress sites find a path to realizing the value of what they've created.
Yeah. We use the word estate agent in the UK, but I think maybe in Australia, I don't know if it's the same, realtor.
Yes,
somebody that sells properties, actual physical bricks and mortar buildings and so on. And you rock up to the estate agent, you say, I'd like to sell my house, please. And then there's a bunch of criteria. A, is it yours? Yes, it's mine. Where is it? Okay. How many bedrooms? What age is it? Has it got insulation? And so on. And so you go through this sort of tick list. They come round, they inspect it, see what the decor is like and so on. And then in the end, they slap a price on it. And you say, yeah, that seems to be what the market can bear. Is it a similar kind of process?
Yeah, it's similar. I guess probably the biggest difference is that we're not a agent or a broker. So we have an onboarding system, and that onboarding system enables you to connect to certain things to verify the information about your site. So there's some stuff that's verifiable, there's some stuff that's not. But as an example, we automatically pull in the SEMrush data or data, depending on the area of the world you're from. And that gives us some sense of domain authority, keyword strength, organic versus paid search. You can then, as the seller, also connect to Google Analytics. If you used AdSense, for example, you could also connect to Google AdSense, and therefore we populate your listing with that. So there is a similar process that, say, in your analogy, a real estate agent would use. There's certainly checks and balances in that regard. And then, of course, there's lots of questions. So how long has the site been around for? That is validated information, all the way through to less objective and less validated information, like, why are you selling it, or how do you make money, or how to, what do you write content about? That's stuff that the seller populates through an onboarding process.
Got it. In the real estate model, there's this one killer factor, which is location. Location trumps everything. If you've got an identical house in the middle of where I live, compared to the centre of London near the Houses of Parliament, well, you know how that goes. It's literally going to be 50 times the value, maybe more, I don't know. Yep. But I'm wondering if there are any sort of key killer components in amongst all of this. Like, for example, I don't know, the domain ending, the shortness of the string itself. So if it's a very short 4-letter domain as opposed to a long and wordy 15-letter domain, or perhaps even like a topic area. Are there any things basically which are in your experience, really have that kind of location value.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so domain can come into it, but often doesn't. So I'll give you an example of where it did come into it. So there was a website sold on Flippa, and the domain was translate.com.
Wow. Okay.
Now, that's clearly a strong domain. That website was second for translation as a keyword, or translate this, translate that as a keyword on Google, second only to Google's own translation functionality.
Okay.
So they were receiving lots and lots of traffic. And as a result of that, whilst the domain was super strong and, of course, played a huge factor in them able to rank as high as they were, ultimately what the buyer valued was its ability to acquire traffic organically. Mm-hmm. So the domain played a factor. But then you get other cases. I mean, I'm staring at one now, and the domain is Crochet Kim. Now, the person who owns the site was called Kim, and the site was about crochet. Now, in that particular case, it has absolutely nothing to do with the domain. It has everything to do with, one, the traffic and how that traffic is originated. So is it organic or is it paid? If it's organic, is it coming from social? Is it coming from search? And then, of course, age, which gives buyers some, confidence in the seasonality or the consistency of the performance. And so I would say age and traffic origination are akin to location, location, location.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just something springs to mind. You mentioned Crochet Kim, which, let's say, for example, I was into crochet, which it turns out I'm not. But were I to be into crochet and I was to acquire that domain, like the Kim bit would really sit badly with me. That would kind of irk me, and I'd want it to be Crochet Nathan, right?
Yeah.
But the traffic is really interesting to me. So you could buy it, and then presumably once you've bought it, there's all sorts of processes by where you could then sort of reflip that domain under your ownership, redirect all the traffic, and obviously do it carefully and do your due diligence and make sure you push everything into the right page and so on. But you could then take the traffic from that and have a completely different domain going forwards.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you own the asset, you own the content that comes with that asset, you own the revenue that comes with that asset, and then it's then up to you to optimize it in any way you see fit. And we actually have, I guess there's two, I know we were talking about sellers, but there's two types of buyers. You've either got the sort of, side hustle or buy your next job group. So that means they're looking to, supplement their income, or in some cases replace their income in full. In which case, they might just take Crochet Kim and just continue to run it as it is. Maybe they're not as perturbed by the Kim bit as you might be. And they're just genuinely looking to make money from it. So in the case of Crochet Kim, it's currently, or it was when it was sold, making $2,500 a month. That can be a very strong income for someone.
Yeah.
But then on to your point, you also get those people who are super into aggregating sites and then optimizing them together using techniques or technology or whatever it might be. And so you get publishing companies who literally buy these small niche sites because they've got the ability to acquire the eyeballs, in which case they might change the branding, they might change the design entirely, but what they're buying is the content base, the ability for that content to drive users, not only users, but ultimately advertisers, and then they aggregate that accordingly. So, yeah, you can turn it into whatever you want. It's like buying a house. You're looking at it for the value that it is today, but you're also looking at it for the value it can create for you long term.
Yeah, it's interesting. So again, staying with the sort of seller model, if I was to go to the website, are there any kind of like rules of thumb that you would say, look, it's just not worth it if X, it's just not worth it if Y? In other words, if it's you've got 3 months since you bought it, you've done nothing with it, there's a WordPress website on there, but that's about, are there any kind of like, just don't bother if?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's very easy to start a site today, and therefore don't bother if you are selling something that doesn't have something unique about it. And by uniqueness, I think there's a couple of things there. So uniqueness can be it's set up beautifully for someone who is less familiar at setting up a website compared to yourself, and it has therefore a great design. Maybe it's got some APIs embedded where you're aggregating content for it automatically. Maybe it's set up beautifully with all the plugins all ready to go, and maybe when somebody takes it over, that you've just saved them so much time, in which case it's got value. But if you've literally just put a template design that you might have bought on Envato on top of a WordPress instance, and then you try to sell that for $1,000, I wouldn't bother, because buyers are savvy enough to say, well, you haven't added value to my experience. And there's enough data and insight for people out there now to know that, you know, that's not what they should be buying, and therefore if you own that type of asset, you shouldn't be selling it.
There's a lot of people in our community who are very skilled with WordPress for obvious reasons, and they would fully understand that it's possible to spin up a WordPress website literally in seconds. And it's also fairly easy these days to, if you're not interested in doing it yourself, you can actually obviously get VAs, or you could get some sort of third-party service to create content of your choice on there. The reason I'm saying this is because there might be people who are interested in this just as a like a sideline to their business, just setting up websites, getting some growth, and then as you call it, flip them over on Flippa. Is that a sort of common? Are there people in your community who are literally doing this as a career? Again, from the seller point of view, they are building digital real estate, somehow massaging it up, working with it over time, and then purely with an eye to then flip it a year, 2, 3 years later.
Oh, absolutely. There are the interesting thing about the community on Flippa is that sellers are buyers and buyers are sellers. So it's not actually the case that a seller doesn't buy and a buyer doesn't sell. And so you have members of the community who are absolutely making a living from creating sites, optimizing those sites, and selling those sites on Flippa. And there'll be people doing that at a smaller level, i.e. making maybe $5,000 to $10,000 a year. But there's people doing that at a big time level, i.e. making $100,000 a year. And that means that they are highly skilled. They've got a knack for spinning these up efficiently, building a small content base, or at least providing the tools which enable a future buyer to get that content. They know the recipe for articulating themselves on Flippa. They're building credibility, like in any marketplace environment, like an eBay or even an Airbnb as a super host. And they're being recognized as go-to sellers of these smaller WordPress assets. And that's a thing. And then you've got people who buy those because they say, I'm going to go back to this super seller, which is what they're called on Flippa, and I'm going to go and buy myself a new WordPress site from this trusted individual. And they're trusted because they've sold 100 of them before, and you know you're getting what you pay for, which is, you know, you might be spending $500 to get something that's beautifully set up. And that's worthwhile, because if you're not as skilled as your community, it's your community thinks it's easy, but for the layman, it's not that easy.
It's just remarkable, actually, to me that there is a business to be had in there. Obviously, you know, as with all businesses, you have to have the chutzpah, shall we say? You know, you've got to be prepared to put in the hours. I'm guessing nobody falls over a log and makes $100,000 a year. No. This is hard work. Presumably, there are times when it works out beautifully and ka-ching, and other times where you've, you know, banged your head against the wall, and this particular domain, for reasons that you can't explain, just doesn't work out. Does your community sort of in some way support these people? That is to say, do you educate them? Do you have like a set of tutorials or guidance on how to build these kind of things?
No, actually. I mean, I wish we did, and we're getting better. we've got a lot of advice on how to buy and sell, but not a lot of advice on how you build a business yourself from selling. And I think we've got some work to do around that. The key thing is that ultimately, given your community, there'll be a bunch of people out there who are really skilled in setting up certain types of WordPress sites. So maybe they're really skilled in setting up AdSense powered sites, Amazon Associates powered sites. Maybe they're skilled in helping people set up sites that are able to generate content very quickly. And so that's what you've got to find, like in any specialization in life, I guess. You've got to find your niche. And once you find your niche, as long as that's repeatable and you're making more from your efforts than the efforts cost you, then you can get up and going pretty quickly. I actually imagine that you'd have a bunch of people in your community who could do that. Plus, I imagine that a bunch of them own really successful sites in their own right that, should they want to, they could probably realize quite significant value for.
Yeah. Okay, just fascinating. You said that buyers are sellers and sellers are buyers, so it's probably a bit of a stretch to do this anyway, but let's do it. So we've talked largely about the sort of buyer side the seller side of things. Let's move on more to the sort of buyer side of things. How does that process work? Is it literally you just go to flippa.com, browse around, see if something takes your fancy, or is there more to it than that? Have you got tools which will help you find certain things, or if maybe you're in a certain niche, you can drill down in a certain way and so on?
Yeah, look, I think there's a little bit more to it, and that's just because we encourage people to go through a fairly exhaustive browsing and searching process. And the reason for that is that you can get caught up in the idea that, all right, great, I will spend $15,000 on Flippa. The site I'm acquiring is making $500 a month, therefore $6,000 a year. And that is therefore, a 40% return on investment in year one. And then I'm home free toward the end of year two.
Yep.
Now, that can sound really, really appealing, but you've got to, one, not spend more than you have to spend. Two, understand that there's almost no such thing as passive income. A lot of buyers will say, I'm looking for a site which will generate passive income. Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? You and I would be buying lots of sites if we just sat there and made money. So you've still got to know what the bones of a site are and what to look for. And so what we say to people is set up a couple of alerts. So use Flippa search, narrow down to the platform, let's say WordPress. Think about how much you've got to spend, therefore narrow down to your budget. Don't go outside of that. Don't start to wander off into a territory which is going to stretch you beyond what you could ever afford. And then, spend at least 30 days contemplating what type of business it is that you would like to run, or what type of blog it is that you would like to run. So if you take, just for the sake of the example, if you take Crochet Kim, well, in your case, you said you're not interested in crochet. So if you buy that, just because it looks good on paper monetarily or from a monetization standpoint, you're going to get pretty bored of your crochet content after a couple of, well, I was going to say years, but maybe
minutes,
months.
Frankly.
Minutes. And so, you want to not only invest the type of money you can afford to invest, but you also want to invest where you've got a passion. And so, in that particular case, the owner sold it to someone who was just as interested in crochet, or at least, hobbies and interests that relate to that. And so that's a really critical piece. So what they essentially do is, after they've found something that they're interested in, they'll contact the seller, and there's a contact seller button, and that will take you to a discussion forum. And from there, you can ask lots of questions of the seller and take the data that's on the listing and use that to inform your conversation. And then finally, after lots and lots of back and forth, you can place an offer, and that offer happens on the platform as well. We encourage that, much like other marketplaces, to protect you. So that then opens up a escrow service and a contract service. And so that's all encompassing. And buyers don't pay Flippa. So we make our money from sellers selling, and that's a success fee. And so buyers are encouraged to place an offer on the platform, use the contract of sale, which is embedded, use the escrow service, which is integrated. And that's essentially it. It's akin to eBay.
Yeah.
The only difference is you're not buying something tangible. You're buying a digital product.
Yeah. It's just fascinating. Just like I said, we never really strayed into this. I notice on the website, though, flippa.com, I should reiterate, that websites is the kind of first thing on your menu. But then we stray into sort of other interesting areas as well. So the next one that comes along, and again, might be of interest to our community because a lot of them are developers and not necessarily just WordPress developers. There's the choice to list and presumably buy apps as well as domains. E-commerce comes up as a possible option. Content, interesting. Marketplace, services, SaaS, and AdSense. I'm just curious. Some of these are pretty obvious. Like I can probably figure out that an app is a mobile device. I'm going to say like iOS, Android.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So we the reason those particular categories are there is those categories dominate our search results. So what happens is buyers will use the Flippa search function, much like a Google search function or any other search function. But we see around 10.8 million searches a month. It's quite extraordinary. Yeah. And so we therefore know what people are looking for. And AdSense is number one, amazingly. Now, an AdSense-powered website is typically a WordPress site. But people search AdSense. They don't necessarily search WordPress. And then for apps, people don't necessarily search iOS or Android. They just search apps. And so that's why it's apps. But yeah, what you've got there is a platform that represents real estate, digital assets, digital real estate, online businesses, stuff that trades in a digital environment. And then, of course, people who have those assets can sell those assets and make money from them. And we genuinely think it's a burgeoning asset class, and actually it's an undervalued asset class. If you go and drop your money in the S&P 500, maybe you can earn 6, 7, up to 10% a year, which would be fantastic. But if you invest in a WordPress blog powered by AdSense, you can be making 30, 40% on your investment, which is pretty outstanding.
Yeah, that's amazing. The one thing that I'm curious about is if I go to your website, there's as you would with real estate, there's a valuation tool, which I confess I haven't used, so I'm about to be extraordinarily ignorant. Apologies for that. How does that work? And presumably that is an automated process. An automated process. But do I have sort of carte blanche to say, do you know what? I'm still going to list it, but I want to drive the price down, or alternatively, I still want to list it, but I'd rather ask for 2x that. Do you have any constraints on what you're willing to list on your platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the valuation tool takes into consideration some of those things that you and I talked about before, where we were giving the analogy to a good street or a good town or a good location. So it takes into consideration the age of the site, the traffic, how you're acquiring traffic. Is it organic or is it paid? It takes into consideration the business model because, for example, SaaS commands a higher multiple than, say, an e-commerce business. So it takes into consideration lots of things. What it then does is it looks at our sales data. So it cross-references your inputs with all of the sales data on Flippa and then basically spits out a valuation based on what other assets that are similar to yours have sold.
Okay.
And so that valuation is more often than not accurate, but of course there's lots of things that can go into how a site is valued. Is it currently declining? Is it, has COVID-19 impacted the traffic over the last 30 days? There's lots of things that can go into it. So it is accurate, but it doesn't take into consideration edge cases or anomalies or pandemics, as an example.
Yeah.
The question on price is a really interesting one. So yes, you control price, but there's two things. One, we have price hurdles. So we won't allow people to price their asset for something which we deem to be unreasonable or ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And that's just for the integrity of the marketplace. So we might let you stretch to something like a 3.5 times net profit multiple. So, for argument's sake, if you're doing $30,000 net profit through AdSense revenue, just as an example, we might let you price that for $105,000, but you certainly couldn't price it for a 4.5 times multiple or a 5 times multiple.
Right.
Now you can mount your case. So when you go through, it will say that is too high. Please do not do that. This is what we recommend. Are you willing to put it into the recommended range? But there is always the opportunity. It says through the onboarding experience, please contact Flippa if you feel like this is an unfair valuation and justify to us why you want to price it so high. And someone can do that successfully because they might be getting, for argument's sake, 500,000 visitors a month, getting that all organically. And for whatever reason, they've never monetized the thing.
Yeah.
So in which case the valuation is going to be way off, and we would therefore provide an exception to our own rules. Once they're up and going, you'll tend to find that the buyers, they're pretty switched on. The buyers will tell you if you're being silly. So buyers will say, I have bought 3 other assets that, have been performing to a similar level, are of a similar age, make their money in the same way, and I bought those for X, Y, and Z, and you are trying to sell me yours for X. Don't do that. So you'll find that, and then on the flip side, if something's super attractive, so I'm looking at, and again, sorry to use the same example, let me change examples. So there's an example called Personality Max. It's a 9-year-old site offering free personality tests. And so your question around pricing, there were 13,399 buyers who looked at this asset.
Whoa.
So it gets pushed up above and beyond what would be considered a reasonable valuation because for whatever reason, there's lots of people interested in it. And you don't necessarily have it over there in Britain, but in Melbourne, for example, houses can go to market by way of a street auction. And sometimes at a street auction, the individuals can get a bit carried away and the price gets pushed up way above the reserve, right? And it's a slightly similar thing here where, the reserve, it was set at 108,000. It ended up selling for 254,000. 9-year-old site offering a free personality test, great traffic, no marketing spend, therefore, unrealized potential. Buyers really liked it. There are 114 bids, lots of, as I said, 13,319 views, and therefore pricing becomes a little bit silly. But, the buyers are controlling what they're willing to pay.
In terms of the way that it's managed, you were talking about this kind of eBay style. Everybody's familiar with that. Let's just go with that. Is that it? Is there a period in time at which, right, this is closing? Is that forced onto you by the platform, or is it possible to just say, look, can I just leave it on for a year and see what the best offer was during that period of time, or is it all got to close on a particular date and hopefully the interest will ramp up?
No, completely flexible. In fact, a lot of people just use auctions to drive a bit of excitement and attention, and then they sell post auction. So you can choose. So you can list as an auction, and you can then set the number of days. So you can set a 7-day auction, 14-day auction, 30-day auction, whatever number of days you think is best suited to your asset. And, I must admit, we need to provide a bit better guidance around that. But most people will choose a 30-day auction, or you can choose to sell as a fixed price listing, which means you drop in the price, and people then contact you and place an offer, and you can accept, reject, or counter that offer. Got it.
On your platform, if I was to sell something and somebody was to buy it from me, how does that actual sale take place? In other words, let's say that you're in, I don't know, Australia, for example, and I'm in the UK. There's 2 colliding sets of lawyers there. I just genuinely don't know what the constraints are. In other words, are you taking ownership of the domain for a short period of time and then handing it over to me? Do I then have to communicate directly with the seller and trust that they're going to be honourable? How does it all work from a legal point of view?
Yeah, great question. And there are some constraints around jurisdictions. So, for example, to own a WordPress blog with a .com.au domain name, you're going to need to set up an Australian business number. Now, you can only get an Australian business number if you're an Australian resident. So that means that that's less likely. However, let's say you're a Brit and you want to acquire a site which is being operated out of the US. That's easier. So how does that process then work? Let's say that for argument's sake, we're not dealing with some of the jurisdiction challenges. The first piece is to agree to a price and the terms around that price. So agreeing to the terms around price could be anything from I will pay you the full amount up front all the way through to seller financing, which is a form of financing where the seller basically takes the payable amount over a fixed period of time with some interest charged on that amount. So let's say you get over that and that is constructed on the platform or over a phone call or whatever. You then accept that offer on Flippa and you then go into what we call the sales completion area, and that's where the legalities start to take place. So the first thing is that we're integrated with escrow.com, and what that means is that the buyer will pay in the money. You will see that the money is sitting in a secure wallet.
Yep.
That wallet is encrypted. They will go through an identity verification. It's like a KYC check, a know your customer check. Both parties must go through that, and we obviously can see that that's playing out through both the integration, but also depending on the value of the website, we will oversee it ourselves. So at that point, I know that the money's sitting there, and I can now use the contract of sale. Now, the steps are interchangeable. I could have exchanged a contract of sale beforehand, or I could not have. But let's say I did not. I would now grab the contract of sale. I might have lawyers involved, but I could just as easily use the Flippa integrated contract of sale. So you download that, you fill in all of the details, and that becomes, to some extent, an asset register at the same time, because you're listing all of the assets which are encompassing social media profiles, databases, maybe there's some employees involved, etc. So both parties need to sign that agreement, and that agreement is then stored on the platform and used as a point of reference governing the transaction. Now, at that point, you've got a signed agreement, you've got some money in escrow. Now, I'm making this sound pretty simple. It can get complex, but in short, what would now happen is that the assets would begin to change hands. Now, remember, the money's sitting in escrow and we're protecting the cash. So the seller would start to transfer the domain name ownership. They would start to transfer the assets. Let's say there's a MailChimp login or whatever it is. They would start to transfer all of those accounts across to the seller, to the buyer. Let's say, for argument's sake, there was also a developer involved who was agreeing to be contracted for 15 hours a week. Then the introductions to that developer would happen and all of that stuff. Now, finally, the buyer needs to say, and let's assume that they've done their due diligence, by the way, at this point in time. The buyer would then need to say, I have received the assets. The assets are in the order that I thought they would be. So they're in working order. I've checked. Everything's great. I now certify escrow.com using this button to release the monies. Now, what that will say is, are you sure you want to do that? Did you receive everything that you intended to receive for your $20,000? Yes, I did. And then the money would land with the seller and job done.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's. I can imagine when you're dealing with high ticket items, there's going to be lots of interesting little turns and shimmies to be done and so on. But obviously, in a much smaller one, probably much more straightforward. Yeah, quick inspection. It's fine. I've got the domain. Click the button. Done. We're over. But yeah, that's fascinating. Over on the platform itself, are there ways, let's say, for example, I'm selling a domain and I wish it to be surfaced by the platform. Can I do that?
Great question.
Does it automatically sort of surface things which are, I don't know, coming up in terms of time, or do you have like a premium tier that you can pay for to say, look, this one, everybody notice me?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we are a little bit like other marketplaces. Let's take eBay again, where we have, what we call marketplace dynamics playing out. Now, we are going to reward certain assets, regardless of what they pay us to list. And we'll talk through that in a minute. We're going to reward certain assets for certain reasons. And so they're going to rise to the top. And that's no different to Google's search algorithm. It's no different to any other search algorithm. You have certain way of scoring the quality of an asset. In our case, we score both the asset, but we also score the seller. And so, for example, if you choose not to verify your ID, if you choose not to verify your phone number, and you choose not to drop a profile photo on the listing,
right,
your listing is getting penalized. So that's just one example. Now, if your asset is got very high organic traffic, it's been around for some period of time, let's say 3 years, then we know that lots of buyers look for those assets, so we therefore score it high and we then push it to the top, just as an example. Now, you can pay Flippa more than the standard listing fee, which is pretty approachable. It's $49. So what is that in pound? Call it 25?
Yeah, something like that.
So you pay a standard listing fee, and then you're beholden to our scoring algorithm. But you could, in theory, pay for an upgrade, and you can get all sorts of things. So you can get us writing blog posts about you. You can get us advertising you on Facebook. You can get us doing a whole heap of stuff, which ensures that you get a lot of eyeballs. And so there's a few things that play out, whether it's quality or whether it's you paying. We take that into consideration as to what gets shown and what doesn't get shown.
So there are ways, if you feel that there's going to be real interest in something that you're owning, you can promote it and push it to the front. So as an example, at the moment I'm just browsing on the homepage. I can see that there's singlemomsincome.com going for $34,000 US, and then there's ringtoperfection.com, which I'm presuming has something to do with rings on your fingers, $175,000.com. Is it likely that the editor's choice ones have come through that sort of bumped up fee paying structure, or, as you said, is it just possibly organic because they've got these great attributes?
Yeah, good question. So in the case of editor's choice, you can't pay to be there.
Right.
That is our marketing manager and content marketing manager looking at assets that they believe are unique and that they believe are going to be super interesting to buyers. And they typically have something unique, or they're in a particular niche that we think is interesting right now. And so as a result, they'll get there. But directly below that, or a little bit below that, you've got sponsored listings. And then when you jump into search, you've got sponsored listings that are getting all sorts of additional treatment because they've paid us. But the editor's choice, you can't actually pay to get into. And typically it's certainly a good quality listing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think probably I've gone through my battery of questions. I hope I've managed to get everything. But as always at the end of these interviews, I just say, is there anything that I missed? Is there any glaring thing that you think your platform delivers that I've just totally missed?
No, that's been fantastic. I mean, one of the things I want to reiterate is we completely respect and admire communities operating in all sorts of spaces, be it Amazon, be it AdSense, be it WordPress. We genuinely believe that there are communities that are creating extraordinary value right now, and value not only for themselves but potentially for others. And so we see ourselves as being a marketplace that can represent those people, and that's probably the only thing I'd end with.
Yeah, and it is an area where our community do have some expertise. It may not be something that you've thought of before, maybe something you're heavily into. But Flippa.com is how you're going to find Blake. I wondered if you wanted to drop any emails, Twitter handles, anything, any way of contacting you personally. You can, of course, avoid that question altogether.
Absolutely. No, not at all. I love feedback, and I love helping people in this space. So people can get me directly at Blake, BLAKE, at Flippa.com if they just want to ask me any questions about what it all means and how to go about it. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, so find me there, Blake Hutchison, HUTCHISON, and I'm at Twitter at Blake Now.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed chatting about Flippa. It's certainly something that I'm going to be exploring in the near future. That looks really good. Thank you, Blake. Stay safe. I hope you have a nice week.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was certainly very enlightening to me. I didn't realise that there was so much that went on behind the scenes when you flip things, be that domains or apps or whatever it might be. And it was really fascinating chatting to Blake about what goes on and all of the measures that they use to make it easy and to protect you. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by A/B Split Test. Do you want to set up your A/B split tests in record time? The new A/B split test plugin for WordPress will have you up and running in a couple of minutes. Use your existing pages and test anything against anything else. Buttons, images, headers, rows, anything. And the best part is it works with Elementor, Beaver Builder and the WordPress block editor. You can check it out at absplittest.com. Okay, join us next week on Monday. I'll be putting out my newsletter at 7 a.m. UK time, and then at 2 p.m. UK time on that same day, we'll be doing the live version. We used to call it the WP Builds Weekly WordPress News. We're now going to call it rather grandly This Week in WordPress. So that's going to be with Paul Lacey and myself and a couple of notable WordPress guests. We'll have to wait and see who they are, but that's 2 p.m. UK time, wpbuilds.com/live, and then I'll also put that out into YouTube the day after as well. So lots in store this week. See you next week for the podcast, Monday for the other stuff. Stay safe. Bye-bye for now.